Namaskar. In the series of literary criticism, we have come now to the new classical period. New classical period starts with the restoration of monarchy in England in 1660. Along with monarchy, theatres were also restored. As you know that theatres were suspended in 1642 at the time of the Civil War, and a strict law was passed that whosoever would go to the theatre, whosoever would be involved in theatrical activities must be punished. In new classical period, poets, critics and essayists like John Dryden emerged. John Dryden was a poet, he was a critic, he was an essayist, and he was the royal historiographer, and Dryden was above all the first poet laureate of England. First official poet laureate of England was John Dryden, and he wrote several prefaces, several monologues, several epistles in favor of criticism, where he discussed dramatical activities, especially the rhyme, the purpose, the function of poetry. Right? The debate about drama was not new. Since the establishment of the Royal Society in 1660 in the patronage of the King Charles II, the debate was on its peak. The Royal Society represented a string to life of the scientific and literary communities, which was encouraged by the restoration of Charles II in England. And as you know that Charles I was assassinated in 1649, and for the 11 years there was an absence of monarchy in England. England was governed by the Lord Protectorate Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell died in 1658, and his son was not as competent as the father was, so English Parliament called back the son of Charles I, Charles II, and he was throned in 1660. The restoration also brought about the reopening of the theatres and consequently the renewal of dramatic criticism. The poet and dramatists like Richard Flecknoe, who was highly satirized by John Dryden in his poem Mac Flecknoe, and Richard Flecknoe was also satirized by Andrew Marvell in his poem. Richard Flecknoe wrote a short discourse of the English stage. A short discourse of the English stage. And it was not an individual piece of criticism, but it was written as a preface to his play Love's Kingdom. Right? It was written as a preface to the play Love's Kingdom, a pastoral tragic comedy in 1664. Flecknoe is a character who stirs curiosity amongst the students and amongst the teacher, amongst the member of the society as well. Seemingly an Irishman and a Roman Catholic priest, he spent time on the continent, and when Andrew Marvell encountered him in Rome, he commented on Flecknoe's appetite for reciting his own poetry. Marvell treated him to a satire, and Marvell wrote a satire, Flecknoe, an English priest at Rome. Flecknoe, an English priest at Rome. This was a piece of satire written on Richard Flecknoe by Andrew Marvell. Right? Andrew Marvell satirized him in this piece. Right? Marvell treated him to a satire, and Dryden pawned scorn on him in Macflecknoe and gave him the epithet heir to the kingdom of dullness. However, Flecknoe's preface was not as absurd. Looking back on Elizabethan dramatists, he finds the main native fault, that of huddling too much matter together. Huddling too much matter together. I quote here from his preface, a short discourse of the English stage. The fabrication of excessive intrigue. The audience should be led into a maze from which it is possible to find the way out, and not into an impenetrable mist. A good play has to be carefully and evenly designed. Carefully and evenly designed. The dramatic poet is to the stage. What is the importance of dramatic poet? A dramatic poet is to the stage as a pilot is to the ship. Right? A dramatic poet is to the stage as the pilot is to the ship, and the actors what an architect is to builders. He is to be a good moral philosopher. Right? In the words of Flecknoe, a poet, a dramatic poet has to be a moral philosopher. Moral philosopher means still in the 17th century morality was there. Moral philosopher, but yet more learned in men than in books. He should be a moral philosopher and he should have competence. He should have knowledge about men more in comparison to knowledge of books. Right? He should not be bookish, but the imitation jo hai na, he should be the object of imitation should be man rather than book. All right. Flecknoe's poet will be wise, witty and good, but not above enjoying a drink. Shakespeare excelled in natural vein, Fletcher in wit, and Johnson in gravity and ponderousness of style. Indeed, he says Johnson mixed up too much erudition in his plays. If you compare him with Shakespeare, you see the difference between nature and art. Shakespeare is the poet of nature and Ben Jonson was the poet of art. And if you compare Ben Jonson with Fletcher, then you see the difference between wit and judgment. Wit is an exuberant, overflowing thing, but judgment is a restrained, well-poised thing. Flecknoe gives us his definition of wit. It is the spirit and quintessence of speech. What is wit? It is the spirit and quintessence of speech, as the definition was given by Richard Flecknoe. Alright, extracted out of the substance of the thing we speak of. There is nothing redundant, nothing lifeless, nothing cheap in the way of verbal devices. It is to pleasant and cheerful discourse what eloquence is to grave and serious discourse. You can acquire wit not by art and precept, but by nature and company. It means why I am telling you all these points, because the debate on drama was already there. And along with Charles II, a few royalists who were poets as well were in France. French plays were in those days very popular, very famous, as a performance of plays were totally banned in England. So when Charles II came back to England, he didn't come alone. He came England with the French formulas of drama. And people, the poets, the dramatic poets especially, started to write plays in imitation of French plays. And then Dryden comes. Dryden comes with his essay where he defends English drama. right? The essay on dramatic poesy, the today's lecture is based on that essay only. He talks about the merits and demerits of classical drama, French drama, English drama and modern drama. And finally, he says that English drama, modern drama is far ahead, far better than the French plays, than the classical plays. The entire essay is written in the form of dialogue, Platonic dialogue. Plato also wrote his Republic, his Aeon, his books in the form of dialogues. So, Mr. John Dryden also imitated Plato's form of style, Plato's form of writing for his essay on dramatic poesy. So, let's start his essay. Let's start the main tenets of Dryden and the main writing of Dryden in the field of criticism. And as you know that Dryden is called the father of English criticism. By whom? By none other than the literary dictator Dr. Samuel Johnson. He is the father of English criticism. John Dryden is the first practical critic. Before him, there was criticism, but there was theoretical criticism. When we come to Dryden, he started practical criticism. He tried to write the ways, he tried to tell us what was pleasant and what was unpleasant. And he said that things keep on changing according to culture, according to time, according to monarchy. There must not be any fixed rule, right? आइए शुरू करते हैं ऐसे ऑन ड्राइडेन, और ड्राइडेन से पहले आते हैं he is Mr. John Dryden. All right, born in 1631 and died in 1700. And you know that the restoration period is also known as Age of Dryden. Restoration period is also known as the Age of Dryden from 1660 till 1700. This is the time period of restoration. Dryden was a poet, Dryden was a critic, and Dryden was a dramatist. But here today we are going to discuss Dryden as a critic only, right? Dryden as a critic only, and as a critic he is known as father of English criticism, and Samuel Johnson calls him father of English criticism. One of the most important questions. And Sir Walter Scott, a 19th century romantic novelist and essayist. Sir Walter Scott is called the father of historical novel. He calls John Dryden Glorious John. These are the epithets, glorious and father of English criticism, that are attributed to him. So you can just imagine the huge personality of John Dryden. Dryden's critical works were in different prefaces, in different epistles, in different epilogues to his or some others' works, others' plays. I have given here a summary of his critical writings. Epistles dedicatory of the Rival Ladies. Rival Ladies was the name of the play, and for this he wrote epistle dedicatory. Dedication to N.S. Mirabilis. N.S. Mirabilis is the poem that he wrote after the London fire and the Great Plague of London, and then essay of dramatic poesy. This is the only piece, only essay that is exclusively written on criticism. Rest of the essays, rest of the epistle, dedication, defense, right, they were prefixed as preface or epilogue, right? He wrote a defense of an essay of dramatic poesy. Once he wrote essay of dramatic poesy, and then he wrote a defense of essay on English poesy, and this was added as a preface to the Indian Emperor. The Indian Emperor is a play by John Dryden. And then another preface that he wrote to the Conquest of Grenada, part 1 of heroic plays. This is the preface, and it was followed by an epilogue as well. And then he wrote the defense of the epilogue in the second part of the play, the Conquest of Grenada. These are his critical activities, these are his critical prefaces and epilogues. The apology for heroic poetry, and it was prefixed to the state of innocence. And you know that the state of innocence was the dramatization of John Milton's Paradise Lost. Right? Milton's Paradise Lost was an epic poem on the fall of man, and Milton's poem was dramatized by John Dryden under the title The State of Innocence. And for this state of innocence, he wrote a preface, The Apology for Heroic Poetry. And next was prefaced as Troilus and Cressida's preface, The Grounds of Criticism in Tragedy. Troilus and Cressida was a poem. Initially, it was written by Geoffrey Chaucer. William Shakespeare wrote a play under the title Troilus and Cressida, and Mr. Dryden rewrote Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, and it was prefaced with The Grounds of Criticism. And then a discourse concerning the original and progress of satire, and it was prefixed to the translation of the satires of Juvenal. And you know, Juvenal was a Latin satirist, and John Dryden translated Juvenal's satire, and it was prefaced with a discourse concerning the original and progress of satire. And then he wrote another preface, A Parallel of Poetry and Painting. A Parallel of Poetry and Painting, and it was prefixed to the translation of Du Fresnoy's Latin poem De Arte Graphica, and then the dedication of the Aeneas, and it was prefixed to the translation of Virgil's works discussing epic poetry with particular reference to Virgil, and finally the preface to the Fables. He wrote the work Fables, Ancient and Modern, where he translated a few classical writers as well as Geoffrey Chaucer, and it also had a preface. Right, so these are the prefaces, these are the epilogues, right, that John Dryden wrote, and all these prefaces, all these epilogues contain Dryden's critical views, though almost views are repetitive, right? They are repetitive, they come time and again, but it also provided the opportunity to John Dryden to express his opinions, and he kept on expressing his opinions on poetry, about poetry, on drama, about drama throughout his life. Alright, so these are the works, Dryden's critical works, prefaces and various works. Alright, and now his magnum opus, An Essay of Dramatic Poesy. An essay of dramatic poesy is written in the form of dialogue. There are four interlocutors, four characters who speak the views expressed by Dryden. And an essay of dramatic poesy was written probably in 1616 during the closure of the London theatre due to plague. Whenever plague came to Europe, theatres were suspended. Theatres were suspended at the time of plague, and then Shakespeare had written his two magnum opus narrative poems, The Rape of the Lucrece and Venus and Adonis. And when theatres were suspended in 1665-66 due to the Great Plague in London, Mr. Dryden wrote the essay, An Essay on Dramatic Poesy, right? And it can be read as a general defense of drama as a legitimate art form. The essay is structured as a dialogue among four friends on the river Thames. And the essay was occasioned by a war between England and another country. And you know the name of the country with which England waged the war in 1666, and at that time the essay was written. Why did Dryden write the essay? What was his aim? As I told you earlier, that French formulas were overpowering English theatre. To save English theatre, in defense of English theatre, he wrote the essay, an essay on dramatic poesy. This was the aim, to vindicate the honor of English writers from the censure of those who unjustly prefer the French before them. There were dramatists, there were writers who were preferring French literature, French precepts, right? They had this belief in English precepts, English version of drama, and Dryden wanted to restore the English spirit of drama, English version of drama, and that's why he wrote the essay, as he himself wrote in the preface to his An Essay of Criticism. The preface to An Essay of Criticism is known to the reader, and into the reader he wrote, he tried to give his objective to vindicate the honor of our English writers from the censure of those who unjustly prefer the French before them. Censure means criticize. Criticism of those who unjustly prefer the French before them. All right, let's come to the next slide. And this was the occasion. The four people were on the barge. This is the barge, you know. Barge is a big boat, and the four people, four characters and the sailor were there on the barge during a naval battle between the English and the Dutch fleets. English and the Dutch fleets, they were going to the battleground, and while they were on the barge, a general discussion on poetry started, and then finally it came the shape of an essay of dramatic poesy. So this was the occasion. All right, these were the four interlocutors who were on the barge, and they started discussion. Eugene's and all the four characters, Dryden had given a pseudonym of all of them. Right? Pseudonym, why? Because they were very popular during the time of Dryden. And had Dryden taken their original name, they might have become the victim of some controversies. So Dryden adopted fake names. Dryden adopted nom de plume of the four people, four writers of the period, and gave the pseudonym. Eugenius is the pseudonym, and in real Eugenius was Charles Sackville, then Lord Buckhurst. Crites is the second character, and in reality he was Sir Robert Howard, and Robert Howard was his Dryden's brother-in-law. Right? And the third character is Lycidas, and Lycidas was in fact Sir Charles Siddle. And finally, the fourth one is Dryden himself, and the name of Dryden in the essay is Neander. There are four interlocutors: Eugenius, Crites, Lycidas, and Neander. Right? Four interlocutors talk on four different types of drama. Right? Which drama? Who talks on which drama? Eugenius talks about English drama, preference of English drama. Crites talks about classical drama. Lycidas talks on French drama, and Neander talks on modern drama. The comparative superiority, what were the content, what were the subject on which the people were discussing? The comparative superiority of the ancient and the moderns. First question was the superiority of classical versus modern. First question of debate. Second question of debate, superiority of English drama, superiority of English plays versus French plays. And the third question of debate was rhyme versus unrhyme. These were the three questions of discussion among the interlocutors. Which drama is preferable, classical, modern, English or French plays, and then the question on rhyme. These were the four areas on which the four interlocutors concentrated, delivered their views. Superiority of the ancient and the moderns. Dryden demonstrates the superiority of the moderns over the ancients, and also the superiority of contemporary English drama, English dramatists over the Elizabethan dramatists. The comparative merits and demerits of blank verse. Rhyme versus unrhyme. And rhyme for dramatic purpose, Dryden upholds the superiority of rhymed verse. For Dryden, rhymed verse are superior, not the blank verse. Though he himself wrote his greatest heroic tragedy, All for Love, in blank verse. So formula is quite different than application. Right, contemporary views, and then we come to debated questions. The questions on which there was the debate, as I told you, the relative merit of classical drama and classical drama upheld by critics versus modern drama championed by Eugenius. Whether French drama, as Lycidas maintains, is better than English drama, as Neander maintains. Whether plays in rhyme are improvement upon blank verse drama, a proposition that Neander, despite having defended the Elizabethans, now advance against the skeptical critics, who also switches from its original position and defends the blank verse translation of Elizabethan drama. Who represents what? Critics represents classical drama. Eugenius represents modern drama. Neander represents English drama, and Lycidas represents French drama. These are the four interlocutors. The essay handles 5 critical questions. And what are those 5 critical questions? The relative merits of ancient and modern, whether existing French school of drama is superior or inferior, whether English Elizabethan dramatists were in all points superior to those of Dryden, whether plays are more perfect in proportion as they conform to the dramatic rules laid down by the ancients, whether the substitution of rhyme for blank verse in serious plays is an improvement or not. Right? These are the questions that are debated in the essay. Right? These are the questions that are debated in the essay. All right. These are the 5 significant, 5 important parts where they debate, where they discuss the relative merits of ancient and modern, whether the existing French school of drama is superior or inferior to the English, whether Elizabethan dramatists were in all points superior to those of Dryden times, whether plays are more important, more perfect in proportion as they conform to the dramatic rules laid down by the ancients, and finally, whether blank verse is preferable to heroic couplets, rhymed verse. Alright, this is the definition of drama given by Dryden, and in Dryden's essay the definition was given by Lycidas, who favors French drama. What is drama? Right now, Dryden doesn't talk like Aristotle. It is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of certain magnitude, in language embellished with all kinds of artistic ornament, each part being found in separate parts of the play in the form of action, not of narrative. No, there is no such definition. Dryden says that drama is just and lively image of human nature. Point number one. What is drama? Just and lively. Lively means presentable, vivacious image of human nature. And what does it represents? It represents the passion, its passions and humors. Whose passions? Lives. Right? Just and lively image of human nature, human nature's passion and humors, and the change of fortune to which it is subject for the delight and instruction of mankind. What should be the purpose? Purpose of drama, in the words of Dryden, is delight, entertainment, and along with delight, drama must have some instruction of mankind. Drama is just and lively image of human nature, representing its passions and humors. Aristotle also talked about passion. Aristotle talked about fear and pity, and the purpose of drama for Aristotle was to purgation, purification of these emotions. But what is the purpose here in Dryden's word? The purpose of drama is to delight and instruct mankind. This is the purpose. Here Aristotle and Mr. John Dryden differs. Though John Dryden belonged to the new classical period, but he was not a blind adherent to the classical rules. John Dryden had his own opinions. John Dryden had his own views, and that's why you could say John Dryden was a modern in the new classical period. John Dryden was a modern in the new classical period. And what is modern? You know the definition of modern, and if you don't know the definition, then I'll let you know the definition of modern in modern criticism, not today. Right, so who gives the definition of drama in John Dryden's essay on dramatic poesy? Then it was Lycidas who defines drama in the essay of dramatic poesy. And what is the definition? Drama is just and lively image of human nature, representing its passion and humors, and the change of fortune to which it is subject for the delight and instruction of mankind. All right. Quick confusion? And if there is any confusion, comment box is open. You can message your question, you can message your query, you can message your doubt, and I will welcome your questions, welcome your query, welcome your doubts. Now I come to each interlocutor one by one. The first one is Kreitz, who speaks in favor of classical drama. What were the features of classical drama that attracted Kreitz? Why should we follow the classical drama, and what are the rules by which drama should be written, drama should be composed? And Kreitz says these are the ancient classical dramatists. He is Euripides. And who is he? Sophocles and Aeschylus. These are the classical dramatists. Aeschylus, Sophocles and Euripides. And you know that Aristotle tells that it was Aeschylus who introduced the second actor to the play. Second actor to the play was introduced by Aeschylus, and the third actor was introduced by Sophocles. And who introduced the first? Then there is the name Thespis. Thespis There is a word in English language, thespian, and thespian means actor, and that thespian word has come from this root. Thespis was a poet, and he added the first actor, and he started dialogue with chorus, right? And this is the emergence of dialogue in classical literature, and Euripides was the first one who started using deus ex machina, right? If you had watched my video on Aristotle's Poetics, then you must have known the answer. The ancients are the lawgivers, and they should be the models for the writers to follow. This is the opinion of Crites. The ancients are lawgivers. They are the beginners, and the modern writers, everyone should follow them in toto. And the moderns do not follow the three unities. What are the three unities? Three unities are unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. Unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. And my question to you is that where does Aristotle talk about the three unities as Crites is claiming here? Crites says that classical writers followed the unities of unity of time, unity of action, and unity of place, but modern writers do not follow. So modern writers are poor in comparison to classical writers as Crites thinks. And the next point that Crites made is the moderns are dependent upon ancients. Modern poets are dependent on ancients. Modern poets take the raw material from the ancients. Modern poets take the model for their plays from the ancients. So if the moderns are dependent on ancients, and if moderns are not abiding by the rules, by the precepts given by the classicals, then how can they be thought superior? It means in the view of Crites, classical plays are superior in comparison to contemporary, in comparison to English plays. All right, any confusion? I hope कोई confusion अब नहीं होगी. Although the second interlocutor is Eugenius. Eugenius says that Crites is right when he says that modern dramatists have borrowed a lot of things from classicals. Yes, they have borrowed. Moderns have profited from the ancients, but they now excel the ancients through their work. But modern writers now have gone far ahead, right? They are far ahead from the classical writers. We moderns have borrowed from them, but they have excelled them as well. Number two, the ancients have not followed the unities. What did Crites say? Crites said that ancients followed the unities, and here Eugenius says no, not at all. All the classical writers didn't follow the concept of unities. The ancients didn't have any sense of the division of the play. Now once again he says that during the time of ancient writers, classical writers, there was no concept of act and scene. It was only Horace who talked that there must be 5 acts in the play, and the classical plays were not divided in acts and scenes. Then how can they be superior? The ancient plays lack originality. This was the next argument. Ancient plays were based on historical matters, based on mythological matters, based on Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. It means they didn't have any originality, and the modern plays have originality, right? English plays have originality. So obviously we are superior, we have excelled. And finally, the ancients did not include emotions like love in their plays. They included emotions like pity and fear, but love was far away from the classical writers. These were the arguments given by Eugenius. in the essay of dramatic poesy. All right. And then the French dramatist Lycidas comes, and Lycidas tries to prove that French are superior, as French are the strict adherent to classical rules, classical formulas. According to him, French plays follows the unities of classical writers. French plays follows the unities, and French playwrights write simple plays. They do not use complex plot. And Aristotle talked about complexity of the plot. And for Aristotle, plot is the soul of a tragedy. And Aristotle preferred complex plot to simple plot. And French dramatists did not prefer complex plot. Lycidas says that they write simple plot. And above all, French playwrights do not intermingle tragedy and comedy. And English plays mixes tragedy and comedy, and they make the plays more complex, more complicated. They prefer emotion over action, plot, violence. Right? Aristotle had said that the play must be acted, not narrated. And Lycidas says that things that are not actable, like murder, must be narrated, must be told to the audience, that should not be acted, and French plays do not show such heinous crime on the stage. That's why French plays are spreading morality. They are preferable, as Lycidas thinks. They write their dialogues in rhyming verse. Rhyming verse means they are writing in heroic couplets, so they are preferable. These are the opinions expressed by Lycidas for sake of French dramatists. All right, any confusion? This essay is also prescribed in UP Higher Education Commission syllabus, and this essay is also prescribed in the syllabus of various universities, right, in the section of literary criticism. And this essay is one of the most important essays for UGC NET. So you have to delve into it. You have to watch this video time and again if you want to clear your examination in one go. Just let me have pause and then I shall proceed. And finally, Neander comes. The fourth and the final interlocutor is Neander. Neander is none other than John Dryden himself. And Neander supports English plays. Neander supports English plays. Neander supports tragic comedies. And Neander supports the rhyming verses. He supports Lycidas criticized English plays for showing violence or death on stage. Neander defends this by saying that death is the ultimate reality and drama presents reality. Why should not death be shown on the stage? And the English dramatists are only presenting lively image of nature. John Dryden, Neander criticizes French dialogue as being too cold and too long to suit the taste of the English audience. Neander says that such long dialogues, lengthy dialogues and cold dialogues must be the preference, must be the liking of French people, but we English people do not believe in so much narration. We English people believe in action, and death is the ultimate reality and it must be showed on the stage. And he defends the violation of the unities by English dramatists by claiming that there is no harm in violating if the drama is fulfilling its purpose. If the drama fulfills the purpose that has been assigned to it, then there is nothing bad in the violation of unities. And in fact, Aristotle talked about only one unity. The rest of the unities were attributed to Aristotle by French critics and Italian critics in the medieval and Renaissance time. So these are the opinions expressed by Neander. Neander defends violation of unities, and then Neander defends the murder scene on the stage, and then Neander defends rhyming couplets, rhyming verse. Right? Neander says that the English violation of the unities lends greater copiousness and variety to the English plays. English plays cannot be monotonous if they are violating the unities. What do the unities do? They only narrow the scope of the drama. They only narrow the scope of the drama, and English plays cannot be narrowed down. English plays cannot be narrowed down, so English plays cannot follow the unities. Very simple. The unities have a narrowing and cramping effect. Not only narrowing, but cramping effect on the French plays, and they are often betrayed into absurdities from which the English plays are free. And Neander here makes an allegation on French drama. French dramas lead to absurdities. The strict adherence of any rule, the strict adherence of any formula will lead to absurdities, and so is the case with French dramatists. The English disregard the unities, enables them to present a more just and lively picture of human nature. And if you want to present just and lively image of human nature, then you need not follow any formula. You have to be free. You have to be free to pick your subject matter. You have to free to pick your style, and you have to be free to present your material. The French plays may be more regular, but they are not so lively, and drama must be just and lively. French plays are not lively, so we should not follow the French dramatists. Next, he comes to Shakespeare. Shakespeare plays are more true to nature, because Shakespeare's nature doesn't come from a book, but the nature is inherent in William Shakespeare and more delightful than any French play, even though he has not observed the unities. Shakespeare didn't follow any unity, but his plays are more lively, his plays are more just than the French plays. So unities, adherence of unities is not mandatory at all. The English, when they do observe the rules, like Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson was a classical dramatist, though living in the time of William Shakespeare, and he followed the rules established by the classical critics, classical philosophers. And when Ben Jonson has done in The Silent Woman, show greater skill and art than the French. When we do follow the rules, we do follow the unity, we follow them better than the French people. We believe in action, we do not believe in narration. When we follow strictly and we give better plays. And when French follows, वो क्या करते हैं? French follows unities and they give absurdities. We follow unities and we give uniqueness. There is no harm in introducing by concernment or by subplot, for they impart variety, richness and copiousness. If we add a subplot to the plays, then the subplots impart variety, they impart richness and they impart copiousness. And if they are increasing the beauty of the drama, then what is bad in introducing subplots? That is also justified. So these are the justifications of John Dryden that he had initially written to vindicate the English dramatists, and he has very beautifully vindicated the English dramatists. And then John Dryden justifies the introduction of tragedy and comedy simultaneously. Tragic comedy, the contraries when placed near set off each other, and continued gravity depresses the spirit. So continued gravity depresses the spirit. A scene of mirth thrown in between refreshes, right? That's why tragic comedy is mandatory. Mirth does not destroy compassion. Mirth means happiness, mirth means comedy. Just as the eye can pass from one unpleasant object to other pleasant object, so we can also follow the tragedy as well as comedy. हम ट्रेजेडी और कॉमेडी को एक साथ लेकर के चल सकते हैं. The English have perfected a new way of writing not known to the audience, or to the ancients, to the classicals, to the French people. Right? English have had the special power. They formulated a new type of drama by intermingling tragedy and comedy. That is the tragic comedy, and this is the uniqueness of English plays. It is all question of progress, of change of tastes. The ancients cannot be the model for all time and for all countries. The real test of excellence is not a strict adherence to rules or conventions, but whether the aims of drama have been achieved. The real test of excellence is not in the following of rules, is not in the following of precepts, but the real test lies in the excellence of purpose, whether the purpose is achieved or not. And this is the real contribution of English drama to the world, that is the introduction of tragedy and comedy. And you know that Dr. Samuel Johnson, in his preface to Shakespeare, has also defended Shakespeare's violation of unities and his introduction of tragedy and comedy together. So it was John Dryden who first defended violation of unities and violation of single unity. He defended subplots, he defended tragedy, comedy, and he defended rhymes. And then John Dryden comes to the function of poetry. The three classical poets, philosophers talked about the function of poetry, and first it was Plato. And for Plato, what was the purpose of poetry? Plato even had banned the poetry from his Republic. Aristotle talked about the purpose of poetry, function of poetry, and then Horace talked about the function of poetry. For Plato, the function was poetry was to instruct, only to preach. And for Aristotle, the purpose of poetry was to delight. And for Horace, the purpose of poetry was to instruct and delight. Instruct and delight. And John Dryden says that the purpose of poetry is not instruction, right? The purpose of poetry is not only instruction, but the purpose of poetry is to delight as well. For John Dryden, poet is neither a teacher nor a bare imitator, but poet must be a creator. This is the definition of a poet given by John Dryden. Right? What is the definition of poet? Poet is neither a teacher, poet is neither a imitator, but poet is a creator. He should create something for the welfare of people, for the welfare of literature. Plato wanted poetry to instruct the reader. Aristotle wanted poetry to delight the reader. Horace wanted that poetry should delight as well as instruct, and Longinus wanted that poetry should transport, poetry should have the moving power. Dryden was a bit moderate and considerate in his views and familiar with all of them. He was of the opinion that final end of poetry is delight and transport rather than instruction. This is the final view of John Dryden on poetry. Poetry should have the power to delight, poetry should have the power to transport, and poetry doesn't need to teach every time. It does not imitate life, but it presents its own version of it. For Plato, poetry was merely imitation. For Aristotle, poetry was merely imitation. But for Dryden, it is not the imitation, but it doesn't imitate life, but it imitates its own version of life. Means it presents a new life. Dryden had argued that delight is the chief, if not the only end of poesy. Instruction can be admitted, but in the second place, for poesy only instructs as it delights. Delight is first, and if there is any need, then poetry can be instructive as well. So this was the defend of whom? This was the agglomeration of Horace and Longinus. Right? He discarded Plato in the function of poetry, and he discarded Aristotle as well, but he preferred Horace and Longinus. Horace was a Roman critic and Longinus was a Greek one. Longinus talked about his theory of sublimity. And then rhyme. Rhyme is not to be allowed in serious plays, though it may be allowed in comedies. This was the opinion of Crites. Crites attacks rhyme violently. According to Crites, who had supported the classical drama, who talked about the superiority of the classical drama, now he attacks the popular rhyming verses of the 17th century of the Restoration period. And Crites says that rhyming verses are not good for the serious plays, are not good for the tragedies, but they could be used in comedies. Comedies are ridiculous, comedies are ludicrous, and serious plays should not be written in the rhyming verses. Why? Because rhyme is unnatural. And he was right. Rhyme is unnatural for a play. For a play is in dialogue, and no man without premeditation speak in rhyme. If you want to speak in rhyme, it means you have to meditate a lot, you have to think a lot, and drama is written in a dialogue form. And how can a character can meditate first and speak second? So for drama, rhyming is not appropriate. And unrhyming lines are very close to nature. And Aristotle had also talked about that the dialogue must be closer to naturality. Blank verse is also unnatural, for no man speaks in verse either, but it is nearer to prose, and Aristotle had laid down that tragedy should be written in verse form, which is nearer to prose. Right? He was a defender of classicals, So once again he quotes Aristotle, saying that Aristotle had talked about that drama must be written in verse form, and that verse form must be nearest to prose. Drama is just representation of nature, and rhyme is unnatural, for nobody in nature expresses himself in rhyme. Rhyme is artificial, and the art is too apparent, while true art consists in hiding art. This was the statement given by Horace. It is said that rhyme helps the poet to control his fancy, but one who has not the judgment to control his fancy in blank verse will not be able to control it in rhyme either. Artistic control is a matter of judgment and not of rhyme or verse. And then John Dryden comes and defends the use of rhyming verse. John Dryden says that natural words in a natural order makes the language natural. Natural words in natural order makes the language natural, whether it is verse or rhymes that is used. Rhyme may be made natural by the use of pun on lines. How can rhyme be made natural? And Dryden thinks that rhyme may be made natural by the use of pun on lines and variety resulting from the use of hemstick, manipulation of pause and distress, and the change of meter. And at least I do not agree here with John Dryden. Why? Because nobody has the time to manipulate the word, to think the language in with the application of figure of speech and then reply to a question that has been asked to him. Blank verse, if poetic prose fit only for comedies, rhymed verses alone is suitable for tragedies. This is opinion of John Dryden, and if you are preparing for your examination, then you must not include my opinion. You have to include only the opinions expressed by the critic, जिस पर पेपर में आपके क्वेश्चन आना है. Rhyme is justified by its universal use among all the civilized nations of the world. The Elizabethans achieved perfection in the use of blank verse, and the moderns cannot excel them. So moderns must use rhyming verse. The nobility whose judgment alone counts likes it. Rhyme, the noblest kind of verse, is suitable to tragedy, representing nature exalted to its highest. And finally, rhyme is an aid to judgment and makes it easier for poets to control the free flight of fancy. Right here he compares the application of rhyme to fancy that Samuel Taylor Coleridge talked about in his theory of fancy and imagination. So this was all about the essay on dramatic poesy. If you have still any doubt, comment box is open for you. You can come write your message and you can get your answer as well. This is the Shakespeare and this is Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson and Shakespeare, and you know the very famous line of John Dryden, I admire Jonson but I love Shakespeare. I admire Jonson but I love Shakespeare. And for Jonson, he said that the most learned and judicious writer which any theatre ever had. The most learned and judicious writer that any theatre ever had. This was the statement made by John Dryden on Ben Jonson. And for William Shakespeare, he wrote that he needed not the spectacles of books to read nature. He needed not the spectacles of book to read nature. He was made of nature. Nature comes to him automatically, and William Shakespeare is the poet of nature. All right. Now let's see a few questions asked by UGC, MCQs and PYQs. MCQs on essay on dramatic poesy. One of the most important themes The speakers debate in Dryden's an essay on dramatic poesy. You know the answer. I do not need to tell. European and non-European perfection of reality, English and non-English perception of reality, the relative merits of French and English theatre. They talked about the relative merits of French, English, modern and classical theatre, and this is the answer. Alright, next question. Identify the critics and their respective works, and you can identify Ars Poetica, Poetics, Institutio Oratoria, Discoveries, and Apology for Poetry, and an essay of dramatic poesy. You know the writer of each and every one, and this is the correct answer as well. Next question. In 1668, Dryden wrote of dramatic poesy an essay which uses separate characters. How many? Fill in the blanks. 4 separate characters are characters to dramatize the conflicting viewpoints which new theatrical activity had produced. Next question. In John Dryden's essay on dramatic poesy, Neander defends the English invention of. किसको डिफेंड करता है? इंग्लिश इन्वेंशन ऑफ रोमांटिक कॉमेडी, इंग्लिश इन्वेंशन ऑफ एक्शन ट्रेजेडी, इंग्लिश इन्वेंशन ऑफ ट्रैजिक कॉमेडी और इंग्लिश इन्वेंशन ऑफ मोरालिटी प्लेज. किसको करता है डिफेंड? वो यू नो द आंसर कि ही डिफेंड्स इंग्लिश इन्वेंशन ऑफ ट्रैजिक कॉमेडी एक्सेलेंटली. नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन. In an essay of dramatic poesy, to whom does Dryden refer with the phrase, he needed not the spectacle of books, but to read nature? I have just told you the answer. It was William Shakespeare who need not the spectacle of books to read nature. In Dryden's essay of dramatic poesy, 1668, who opens the discussion on behalf of the एंसेंट्स? एंसेंट्स के बिहाफ पर कौन ओपन करता है ऐसे? लिसिडस फ्रेंच को रिप्रेजेंट करता है, क्राइट्स क्लासिकल को, यूजिनेस इंग्लिश ड्रामा को, मॉडर्न ड्रामा को और नियंडर इंग्लिश ड्रामा को. तो एंसेंट को कौन रिप्रेजेंट करता है? एंसेंट मींस क्लासिक्स, and classics were represented by none other than Crites. C for Crites, C for classics. This is the statement. He found it. It means English brick and left it marble. Remarked one of the great writer on another. Who were they? किसने किसको कहा है, किसके बारे में कहा है? He found it brick and left it marble. English was a brick. Brick means in the primitive stage when it came to him, and when he left it, it had become marble. And who is the critic who said on whom? It was Dr. Samuel Johnson, and he referred here to John Dryden. Right? Johnson on Dryden, he found it brick and left it marble. All right? Next question. In an essay of dramatic poesy, whom does John Dryden refer to as the most learned and judicious writer which any theatre ever had? The most learned and judicious writer which any theatre ever had. And this reference किसका है? ये reference है Ben Jonson का. And finally, thank you. ये आपके YouTube चैनल का लिंक है और ये आपके टेलीग्राम चैनल का लिंक है. अगर आपको पूरी क्लास पसंद आई होगी तो जरूर शेयर करिएगा, जरूर लाइक करिएगा और नेक्स्ट वीडियो का वेट भी करिएगा. जितने लोगों में शेयर कर दोगे उतने लोगों का शायद भला हो जाएगा, है ना. और सबसे बड़ा दान यही दान है. चैनल जरूर शेयर लाइक करिएगा, सब्सक्राइब करिएगा. और हाँ, फॉर द नोट्स यू कैन ज्वाइन आवर टेलीग्राम चैनल. Everything is for free for you. Okay? All the best. Good luck. Bye bye. मिलते हैं जल्दी in the next video.